The Allen Lund Company continues to support the owner-operators of OOIDA. Thank you for what you do, and stay safe.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Ask and ye shall receive. That's what truckers are hoping for as the U.S. DOT considers taking a chainsaw to regulations that fail to improve safety. Mark Schrimmer of Landline Magazine joins us to talk about a process that could result in big changes truckers would welcome. Truckers can live or die by the rates they're paid, but rates have been down. So what can you do? Negotiating is a good way to start. I'll talk with Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. Secondary liability is important to many trucking operations. Ashley Blackford speaks with Trina Skywalker of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department about why it's needed and more. And finally, a new law in Arkansas is designed to put an end to predatory towing in that state. Scott Thompson discusses that and more with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. And now, here's Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark, as we are joined by our other Mark here in Studio A, Mr. Mark Schrimmer of Landline Magazine, for a chat about the news of the day. Good to see you, Mark.
Good to see you, Scott.
So we've talked a few times on the show in recent weeks about this comment period opened up by the U.S. DOT regarding regulations, more specifically, their big push to cut regulations that do not impact safety. That comment period ended yesterday on Monday, May 5th, and the response, I have to say, Mark, wasn't quite as robust as I expected it might be.
Yeah, I mean, it had nearly 900 comments, but when you consider, I've been working at Landline for about 10 years now, and almost every time I've talked to truck drivers, they will complain about the number of regulations that are on the books and how many of them that they believe do little to improve safety, and some of the time actually do the opposite and hinder safety. So when government says, hey, give us your Christmas wish list of things to remove, I would have thought that we would have had thousands and thousands of comments from truck drivers. Now, this was only a 30-day comment period, and, truck drivers are busy out there, and a lot of times, a lot of the comment periods that are out there might just have a few dozen comments. So I'm not trying to act like 900 isn't a significant number. Sure. It certainly is. But yeah, based off of that, I would have thought that more truck drivers would have spoken up and voiced their opinion on it. But with that said, after this period is done, DOT certainly has lots of ideas of things that they could either repeal or modify or amend. There's a lot of options out there that truck drivers have given them.
Yeah, and we've talked about some of the comments. I think maybe midway through the comment period, you and I spoke about some of the comments that were coming in and some of the themes that were emerging, and certainly we heard quite a few things that were repeated by different people. Yeah. As you go through the comments here, again, about 900 of them or so, what were some of the common themes that kind of stuck out to you?
Well, I would say, so the big ones were, and even though this is not a regulation yet, speed limiters has been a proposal that has been out there, and it is still out there right now. Yep. As a proposal. It hasn't been formally withdrawn, and lots and lots of truck drivers, and I know we'll go into a little more, including OIDA, really, spoken out about this idea of making sure that the Trump administration does formally withdraw this rulemaking and this proposal, citing dangerous speed differentials. And this is really, even though this was not a regulation that's already on the books, it is a perfect example of where a lot of truck drivers believe that there are regulations on the books that have this idea that it's going to improve safety, and they actually believe that it would do the opposite because of the speed differentials, taking the control and power away from the truck driver, the professional driver, and making them not have the ability to get away from a potential crash, a dangerous situation, those type of things. So that it was really a perfect example. So that was a major one. Another two that I'll mention is more flexibility within the hours of service regulations. That's definitely was a theme. And then overall, kind of connected to hours of service regulations, so many truck drivers want an end to the electronic logging device mandate, which they believe has actually, again, no proven safety benefits. A lot of the numbers have actually gone in reverse since those were mandated in late 2017. And so that's something that a lot of truck drivers asked to be repealed.
You mentioned OIDA's comments, and it came in the form of a 17-page document. Just tells you how many things the association has on their mind in terms of regulations that may not be needed. You touched on a few of the things, actually, that OIDA mentioned in their comments, but kind of run us through, I think, maybe the main themes there with OIDA's take on this.
Yeah. So, again, speed limiters is a big one, as I mentioned. I won't go too much deeper into that, because we've kind of talked about it. And I do think the Trump administration is at some point going to withdraw, or at least put that proposal on the back burner.
Sure. Yep.
Hours of service, though, I will mention a little bit more. They give some specific examples. If you remember, several years ago, OIDA petitioned the agency under the previous administration, under the Trump administration the first time, to make some changes to the hours of service. That was done. OIDA has now asked for additional times to make flexibility, including giving truck drivers the ability to pause the clock and have a kind of a split period of time, and then also to expand the sleeper berth options to have a 6-4 and a 5-5 split, basically saying that if you give truck drivers the ability to control themselves and know their own body and safety, that some drivers out there aren't able to sleep 8 hours or 10 hours straight. So giving them the ability to do a 5 and 5 may be more beneficial to them. And really the goal should be not just these set amount of hours. The goal should be, if a driver is tired, they shouldn't have to drive, and if they, are alert, they should. And I think giving them the flexibility to make those choices and decisions and be responsible, because a lot of times what the hours of service actually does is, while we think about it as making you not able to drive during these hours, but what it also ends up doing, it closes this window and forces drivers to only drive during this time, and they kind of are under that demand, and that can make for some dangerous situations.
And FMCSA, we should mention, during the first Trump administration in September of 2020, did propose a split duty period pilot program to evaluate kind of these ideas here to see if they would actually help with flexibility and still keep people safe out there. So I'll be curious to see if that actually pops up here. Maybe in the months to come, we'll see if any traction gains.
I think there's a possibility that we will see some proposal for expanded flexibility there.
And USDOT will look at all of these comments that came in. They'll read through all of them. They'll figure out what they want to do next. And we'll, of course, talk to you again when we hear more about what that will look like. Mark Schrimmer of Landline Magazine, everybody, we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's a wrap for Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson. Mark Reddick, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Next, I'll get a few tips on how to negotiate your rates from Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. We'll be back in just a moment with more of our program. Please stay with us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
At Truck Stop, we've built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone's FD694 drive tire for long haul and regional applications now delivers 126,000 more removal miles than the Yokohama TY517 MC2. Contact your Firestone commercial dealer to learn more.
Landline Now, welcome back. Truckers, especially those on their own authority, can live or die by the rates they're paid. But that's been a problem in recent times. So what can you do to deal with the situation? Here was some advice from Tom Crowley and Aaron Lynch of OOIDA's Compliance Department. Guys, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thanks as always, Mark. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And apparently, again, been getting calls about this into the Compliance Department. Folks not only talking about rates, but the fact that they're being hit by so many broker chargebacks. And two different issues, but very definitely linked here. So I want to start off by talking about the rates. And I guess one of the things that this goes back to, Tom, which you've mentioned many, many times, and you too, Aaron, is knowing your cost of operations. I mean, isn't that the starting point?
Yeah, I mean, it's, without you knowing your cost of operation, I mean, how do you know where your break-even point is? When a broker's, lowballing you, without knowing your cost of operation, you may end up taking a load that you're actually paying to haul. So it does come back to cost of operation and an accurate cost of operation based on current fuel prices. As they fluctuate, your cost of operation will definitely fluctuate. You've got a lot of set costs that are the same. Your registration, your insurance, stuff like this. But then you have a lot of variable costs that play into this. So yeah, knowing your cost of operation so that when you're negotiating on a load, and say you're having a hard time getting out of an area and you're going to end up hauling a load that is not quite what you want, I would rather deadhead out of that area than haul freight that doesn't make a profit for me. I say this a lot. I used to run to Florida quite a bit, and I'd get down into Florida. I would get good rates into Florida. Couldn't get anything coming out of Florida. I mean, occasionally somebody would offer me something for fuel money. That's not how that works for me. I'm not putting it on my truck and taking on that liability of that load for fuel money. No, I'll put my own fuel in there. I'll bounce up to the Carolinas or to Atlanta or someplace and I'll get some freight that pays. You're not putting it on my truck if I'm not making money on it.
I remember years ago someone bringing up the fact that brokers would talk about, I'll give you a backhaul. I mean, you got paid a good rate for going here, but we'll give you a backhaul rate to cover your fuel getting home. And he pointed out this is where truckers aren't thinking of the other guy, that your backhaul is his, I guess you'd say, forehaul. It's his regular haul.
It's just a regular haul.
You just need to make sure every one of those loads is meeting that cost of operations there.
Well, and part of that is don't let them know it's a backhaul for you, right? Part of this is sometimes less is more. Renegotiating contracts that you already have with a broker, renegotiating rates sometimes. I mean, the last couple of years, let's all be fair here, the rates have been in the toilet and it's all dried up. And some are more in a positive area than they have been in prior months, but it's going to take a while to get back to there. And
on the backhaul situation, I think a lot of folks don't understand the way the backhaul started. I used to drive for a carrier out of Kansas City, and I had a regular route that I would run, and I would end up down in Mississippi. And now my route paid me to come back to Kansas City because they wanted me back in Kansas City to run it again. And on occasion, coming back, I would find something, or the company would find something and send it my way to put on the truck to carry back. Now, I already got paid for coming back. So this was a true backhaul. I had a little something to bring back to the company so that it paid a little extra. But, the backhaul, like Aaron was saying, you don't go into a broker telling a broker, hey, I'm trying to get home. I need something that goes here. Or I'm wanting to go to this area. I need something that goes there. Because right there, they're going to lowball you. Know
you've lost all the leverage at that point.
Absolutely. And which is part of the issue with all these brokers wanting to do tracking and stuff too. They do take your leverage. They do take take away your ability to negotiate or you take it away by giving them too much information.
Let's talk a little bit about negotiating, because that seems to be another place where a lot of people just aren't getting it, and it's really affecting them. Walk us through, if you're negotiating with a broker, where do you start and how do you proceed from there?
Well, obviously, like we were talking before, your cost of operation, knowing what your cost of operation is and what your prospective or hopeful profit margin would be. And when you call on a load, when you see a load on a load board, now keep in mind the stuff that makes it to load boards tends to be the loads that the brokers, regular carriers passed by. They didn't take it.
Yeah, it's inherently a secondary market.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you see it on a load board and you call a broker and say, hey, I'm interested in this load or, situation, I mean, they've got it listed at one price. Now, that's what they're hoping to get it hauled for or less. You got to go in with a reasonable expectation of some profit margin. You've got to go in with your price and negotiate. Now, today, a lot of folks seem to have a problem with negotiations. I don't know if they're intimidated by it or why that's part of the industry. If you're going to run a small business and you're going to be profitable, you've got to negotiate. Any load that you haul that you don't negotiate hopefully for a better price is money that you could just be leaving on the table. And not only are you hurting yourself, but you're hurting everybody else out there because it keeps those rates down low. You got to negotiate for the best rate possible, and you don't start that at a lower price. You start that at a higher price because you can always come down, but it's real hard to go up.
Well, and I would think as part of that, we've talked about the cost of operations, but a lot of folks will go into the negotiation and say, oh, I've got to have $250. If that's your cost, they're going to try and get you down from there. As you say, that's the whole process. They're trying to get you down. You're trying to get them up. If you start with your bottom dollar, you've got no room to negotiate.
Exactly. And I tell people, know your cost of operation and then add 40% profit margin. Add that 40% and there's your starting point. Now, you can always come down a little bit and, you can work a little bit, but start with a reasonable amount. Because if you start rock bottom, where are you going to go from there?
Well, and the other part of the issue that I kind of want to touch on is even if you do all of what Tom says and then someone else comes in and undercuts you, that does a disservice to everyone. So it can't just be you that negotiates better. It needs to be an all-for-one type of issue. This needs to be across the board. All small carriers need to jump on board with this. It can't just be 20% because the other 80% will undercut that 20% and inherently drive the rates even further down, which has been happening for the past 3 years. And that's part of why it's self-inflicted and why we're in the situation we're in now, because it's been allowed to happen by bad negotiating skills.
Yeah, this is very true. And, you got to keep in mind, too, these brokers, they take notes on when they're talking to carriers. They'll take notes on which carriers they can get to do stuff cheaper and which carriers kind of hold the bar and say, no, I'm not going to go below this. And most generally, not always, but most generally, your better carriers, your folks that do provide that better service, that have the trucks that don't break down, that have the reefers that work correctly and properly, are not your bottom ones. They're not the ones taking this bottom price freight. Because, hey, to keep your equipment top notch, to make those deliveries on time, to make sure everything's good, it costs money. And, if you're not making the money, how do you buy tires? How do you repair your truck?
Well, and I would think that'd be part of your negotiating is saying, listen, I'm providing you better service than a lot of these folks. You've got to sell what you're offering. But I think, Aaron, talking about what you said there, I think one of the key things in negotiating is that moment that you have to be ready to walk away.
Absolutely. You can't be scared that another load won't pop up. They always will. This is the trucking industry. Freight moves every day at high volumes, and there's a lot of places to go. And keep in mind, not only brokers and load boards are out there for you. Direct freight is where to go. Try to do that. It's a lot harder than just saying it, but if it were that easy, everybody would be doing it. But if you can get a couple dedicated runs or shippers to work with, I mean, that can change the whole perspective in your business. And that can sometimes be the difference in staying in business and having to, have a revocation.
Some of the motor carriers that I talk to that are still doing all right, doing okay, they are the ones that have their own customers. They have done what it takes. They've knocked on doors. They've left flyers. They've done that cold, hard sale. And sales, as you know, Mark, sales is hard. I mean, you've got to take 100 no's for that one maybe. But that is what it is. That's what it takes.
But you only need one or two anyways. You're not going to you can't realistically, with a 5-truck operation, a 10-truck operation, even a 1-truck operation, haul for 100 different distributors anyways. I mean, you don't have enough trucks to do that. So you only need one or two to say yes.
Yeah. One or two good shippers that want that good service, that want when there's an issue, they can call and talk to the boss and get things taken care of. That's where the owner-operator, that's where the small operation can shine.
And that's where you run into, we're not saying it's easy. No one's saying that at all. But you have to be able to sell yourself and sell your business and your service, whatever cost that is. And creating those relationships, that foundation can set you apart. And you want to do that early on. If you've been in business 28 years and you don't have something like that, you've inherently done something wrong if all you're utilizing is the load board after that period of time.
There's more money out there than what you can just get pulling through the load board.
One of the things that I think also has to be part of this is going back to that whole thing of walking away and knowing when to do it. But some folks are going to end up sitting for a while, and they get itchy and they think, I've got to have some kind of load. I got to haul something. I got to get miles. But I think both of you guys have said on occasion that sometimes it's better to sit than run and lose money.
Absolutely. There used to be the old phrase, and you used to hear this all the time, if the wheels ain't turning, I ain't earning. Well, you got to be careful with that, because sometimes those wheels will be turning and you're just burning. And you're just burning up your money. You're not making the money. You got to work smarter. I mean, there's a lot to be said for working hard. I just sure wish my dad would have taught me early on to work smarter instead of just harder.
And you don't want to find out 6 months or a year or years after the fact that you've been hauling in the red for so long a period of time and wondering why you're not actually making it, ahead. You want to figure out these costs of operations on day one. And some of these variable costs, as opposed to fixed costs like insurance and things like that, will change. So you want to update your cost of operations as the market updates itself, as those lanes change, as the rates change. It's a constant battle for that, because as everything changes with that, so does your cost of operations. It doesn't just stay stagnant for 10 years.
No, and that's where understanding a fuel surcharge would come in. Understanding and implementing fuel surcharge. So hopefully that's some information some folks can use.
Absolutely. And folks, of course, OOIDA has an interesting little tool on their website, a cost of operations calculator that helps you come up with what your cost of operations is. And we will put a link to that on our website, landlinenow.com, so you can try it out and see what your cost of operations is, so you know what rate you need. In the meanwhile, guys, great topic, good information, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks as always, Mark. Glad to be here.
I've been talking with Aaron Lynch and Tom Crowley of OOIDA's Compliance Department. And of course, folks, if you need help from compliance, the number is 816-229-5791. We'll be right back. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy when your truck on a CAT scale.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
Landline Now, welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina Skywalker with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, Trina?
I am good. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
Good.
Now, today we are going to discuss secondary liability, but before we do that, I wanted to chat with you for a few minutes. For our listeners, I'm sure your name is a familiar one.
That it is.
How many years have you been coming on and sharing insurance advice?
Oh, gosh. I would say... instinctually, I want to say 10, and then I'm like, surely not that long.
I know.
But, I mean, it's been a while. It's been several years.
10 years ago. I'm like, I was still in high school. I wasn't,
okay.
But...
Okay, Ashley.
I wasn't, though. I wasn't. More like 20, but... and how long have you been at OOIDA?
I'm actually getting ready to hit a 23-year anniversary, so I was about that age when I started.
And I was in high school 23 years ago.
Yeah.
What brought you here, and did you start in truck insurance right away?
Yes. Yeah, I started in more of a clerical position. We actually still had paper files at that time, and
way back when,
around 19 dickety-doo, you know. The agents who were selling insurance and on the phones, if they needed to process something in someone's file, we went to the filing cabinet and yanked it out. I had lots of paper cuts and dry hands at that time. But I have family in trucking, and I found everything very fascinating. And listening to the folks on the phone, I realized pretty quick that that's what I wanted to move towards. And I did probably a little after a year. After starting, I got my license and started selling.
Nice. And like you mentioned, you have family in trucking, so you grew up kind of understanding the industry?
I thought so.
Until you came here.
Yeah, I thought so when I started, and then I was like, oh, man, I've got a lot to learn. I mean, I think there is some familiarity with it, you know, enough to make it feel closer to home. But, man, I've learned a lot over the last 23 years.
I'm sure.
A lot.
Now we'll get into our topic, but I do have to ask, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's wondered this, your last name. Is it real? Is it an alias that you use on radio?
No, it is not an alias. It is real. I've only had it a few years. In fact, if there's anyone who's been listening for any length of time, they've heard me go through 2 or 3 names. So this is the final one. I thought it was fun. It is not a former name. I just kind of pulled it out of thin air.
Well, I like it, and I think it's a good one to land on.
I do too. Thank you.
All right. Now, what the listeners are really here for, secondary liability. Let's jump into that. What is that?
Much more fascinating.
Much more fascinating than you. Joking.
Secondary liability is... I don't know if it's just our term. I don't think anyone who's on the road is going to refer to it this way, but... you know, we've got primary liability, and that's the primary one you need to operate equipment. It's what FMCSA requires. Secondary is going to be like a backup to that or second to that. If you have your own authority, you're not going to need it, but most folks who are leased onto a company do need some form of bobtail, non-trucking liability, bobtail deadhead, depending on what your lease requires.
Now, you mentioned it's only needed when you're leased onto a motor carrier. Are there any other situations where you might need or want secondary liability?
I mean, there's times that people want it because they're not leased on, so they don't have that primary liability policy in place, and they just want to move the truck. Maybe they need to go sign a new lease or take it to the repair shop, but this coverage is no good by itself. It does not meet any kind of federal laws. And you do have to have the primary liability in place in order to have this.
Now, if someone calls and says they want, you know, secondary liability or just a coverage if they're going to do a situation like that, will that insurance company know that and say, like, hey, you're going to need primary? Or
I would hope so. I mean, honestly, I think there probably are some agencies out there that aren't. Not that I'm not saying I think they would intentionally sell someone a coverage that they can't use. But I don't know how educated they are about it, or if they realize that that policy doesn't work standalone. Ideally, they're going to know enough about it to say, hey, you've got to have this in place first, and maybe they have that type of policy they can sell. Some places will even have like a short-term or temporary designed to get you from point A to point B. Like we have one that we offer, but you can't get it by itself. You have to secure a permanent policy, and then potentially we have something like that to help out, but I would assume other companies do as well.
I assume you have to prove that you have primary liability, right?
Generally, yeah. I mean, it's a series of questions. We're going to ask if you're leased on. We're going to ask questions about, because we've even had folks with their own authority who try to obtain it because they're used to having it. They're used to being leased on and having that coverage. And then we do let them know if they're getting their own authority, this isn't going to help them at all. It's not going to provide any benefit.
Can you walk me through like what primary liability would cover and then what secondary liability would cover?
So primary liability is going to cover damages to the public. Like I said, that's the one required by law. If you hit a vehicle or damage the public in any sort of way, the primary liability is going to help get that back in place. The secondary, or like your bobtail non-trucking liability, that's really just going to kind of relieve the motor carrier's policy. So if you're on your own time, not under dispatch, maybe you're heading home from delivering a load and get into an accident, this can help relieve their policy from paying out so that they're not on the hook 24/7. And that's why they want you to have it, is just to give them some sort of a break on theirs.
So a motor carrier, will they, I guess, force you to get secondary liability or encourage you, or?
Force is such
force
a strong
probably
word.
a strong word. Yes, sorry.
But, usually the lease agreement is going to say you need to have this kind of coverage. And if you don't secure it, sometimes they might put their own policy in place. They might offer that coverage that they'll provide for you. Or they may just not.
But you're paying for that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And maybe they just won't load you. If they don't have that policy to offer and they can't put you on their policy or whatever the case may be, I would imagine you're not going to run until you get it.
Do you have any examples of, from over your time, of a time when secondary liability came in quite handy for someone?
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of a specific example where it was like a looming situation, but it's always going to come in handy for the motor carrier who doesn't have to pay. And it's always going to come in handy for, the owner-operator who has something happen while they're not under dispatch. It's just that extra security measure, I guess, for lack of a better word right now, to ensure that there is coverage available for the public. Like I said, I can't think of I
put you on the spot there.
Well, that's okay. I wish I had a better answer.
That's
Sorry.
okay. Is there ever a kind of worry of being double covered?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen situations where we've sold a policy, they'll call us, they'll get their physical damage and bobtail, and then call back a few months later and not realize that the motor carrier was providing it also. And they're not both going to pay.
No.
If you've got two different bobtail policies and have an accident, really it's going to be the insurance companies that kind of fight over who's liable, who's responsible. So it is something that you want to check. You want to check that lease agreement. You want to check with the motor carrier. You want to make sure that you're not paying for it through two different places, because you're really just tossing your money down the drain at that point.
What, if someone's kind of unsure about all of this, what are some questions that they should either ask their motor carrier or insurance agent?
They definitely need to find out what they're responsible for. I would always recommend talking to the motor carrier, also looking through the lease agreement, also talking to your insurance agent. Hopefully they can guide you through that process as well. Because a lot of people just say, well, they said that's what I need, and, that's what I want to get a quote on. without fully understanding how they're covered and what's being provided. So, it's a lot of money to spend if you're not certain of what's actually covered.
Will an insurance agent go through the lease agreement?
I doubt most of them would. Here,
I mean, it's not really their job, but yeah,
right. It's not, and I don't think you would want them to, because most of them really don't know what they're looking for. They don't know what's in a compliant lease agreement. Here we've got like our business services section, and if you're a member, they will go through that, let you know if it's compliant, things of that nature. But I would go through someone like that rather than the insurance
somebody
agent.
Who understands that. Yeah. What are some other coverages that kind of go along this?
Well, usually people get their physical damage with that. The secondary liability by itself will cover the public, but it's not going to cover your equipment. If you're in an accident and your truck is damaged, this is not going to pay for that. So we recommend getting physical damage, maybe towing coverages, just to make sure you're fully covered. It's not full coverage. Because we get that a lot too. People say, I need full coverage. And it's not like personal auto, because if you've got your motor carrier providing the primary, bobtail does not fully cover you for damages to the public. Usually only when you're not hooked to a trailer, not under dispatch. So we always go into a further explanation when people say full coverage, because it's really not. But essentially, you want to get something to cover your equipment and then something to cover the public.
What about personal injury?
Well, that's a good question, because there actually is, in most liability policies, there is at least coverage for uninsured and underinsured motorists. So if someone hits your equipment and they don't have insurance, you've got that in place to help with maybe bodily injury, personal injury. But I don't want to confuse that with personal injury protection, because that is, if I understand correctly, designed to maybe cover a deductible on major medical. So we're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars. Some states only require a couple of thousand. It usually is in the liability policy if your state requires it. Well, if your state requires it, it's going to be included. Some states give you the option, so sometimes we sell it and it's your choice as to whether or not you want to have uninsured motorist or personal injury. We're not always going to offer both, because it really just depends on, again, the state. Other insurance companies, I'm sure it varies. On personal auto, you can select different limits. But, we have to go by the state guidelines. We have to figure out, we have to keep track of what they need you to have. And so, yeah, there could be a little bit of coverage for your own personal injury, but again, not enough to cover a hospital stay. So just bear that in mind.
So really just best to actually get on the phone, talk to an agent to see really what is best for you.
Yes.
All right. Trina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
Protect your diesel engine with Howe's Diesel Defender. Restore vital lubricity, eliminate injector deposits, and boost fuel economy by 5% or more. Power, performance, protection, all in one. Howe's Diesel Defender, available now.
With rising costs affecting everyone, switching to a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper can help you avoid expensive repairs and downtime. Save money and keep your truck running smooth with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Arkansas takes a big step toward protecting truckers from predatory towing, while several other states are making changes to fuel tax collection. Welcome back to Landline Now and our weekly state legislative update, which means we are joined by Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine. Keith, how are we doing?
Scott, doing all right. I had a most recent weekend. I spent out watching some softball and some pretty nice weather. So
weather's been great.
There was good and bad with that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it sounds like a good weekend, though, overall, for sure. Let's talk about good news out of Arkansas here. And hats off to Arkansas for making this predatory towing legislation happen. We've got Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders signing it into law recently. Walk us through exactly what this is going to look like moving forward with regard to predatory towing.
Yeah, just some needed reforms as far as I think the bulk of the people, especially in the trucking industry, would say needed to be made. And great to see that the Arkansas legislature moved forward pretty expeditiously, and then the governor signed into law some changes that are on the way in the near term, and then some changes that were implemented as soon as she put pen to paper. But yeah, overall, just a lot of concern there in the state was some bad actors in the towing industry that were making life problematic not only for those who they were towing the vehicles, but also for the towing companies who do business the right way. So there was the feeling there in Arkansas that the rules that they had in place or the structure that they had in place to try to make sure that everything was fair in the towing game weren't getting it done. So they had to step in and make some changes.
And they did in the state have and correct me if I'm wrong here, Keith, but they did have and do have a towing and recovery board that kind of looks at these things. But part of this legislation is sort of overhauling it and improving it, I guess, right?
Yeah. From listening to a lot of discussion there at the State House on the towing and recovery board, they're part of the problem. And with this new law, when it was signed, talking about the things that are taking effect here in the near term and things that are taking effect immediately, they got rid of, so maybe I should say they removed. They removed the entire board. They're still around individually, but they are not collectively in the same
together
position
anymore. Okay.
They just say, you know what, you guys are out of here.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it's a 9-member group that up until this bill was signed into law, they were largely comprised of tow owners. Which was an issue.
Seems like a conflict of interest, yeah.
Well, and then there was nobody on the board that represented any part of the trucking industry. Mm-hmm. So with this new law, for one, the governor is appointing all the board members. The state senate, they will confirm those appointments. A couple of notable additions to the board is one board member is required to represent the trucking industry, and another board member will represent the commercial trucking insurance industry. So, yeah, a couple of needed changes there that I know those in the trucking industry. Definitely welcoming in the belief being that it will help things along as far as being fair for not only those folks who are doing the towing, but the folks that are having their vehicles towed.
Yeah, to get a nice balance there. And the other thing we haven't talked about yet is the complaint process there in Arkansas. If you have a complaint about a towing service, that's going to change a little bit here as well. I think July 1st, right?
Yeah, that is the one rule that didn't take effect immediately, but in the near term is the complaint process. Requirement that invoices for towing that they will include at the bottom of each invoice, and I think it even points out in the legislation, now law, that it would be in bold letters, prominently posted on there, that would include the phone number and the web address of the Arkansas Towing and Recovery Board. Most likely the reason why they're waiting until July 1st, obviously, is that these towing operations are going to have to print new invoices to send out, but also they're going to have a board in place. As I as I was doing a little bit of research for this story, I went in and I visited their website, the Arkansas Towing Board website. And on the page that shows board members, it shows no one.
No one's there, yeah.
So some things need to be done in order to get that into place. But yeah, definitely something that they felt was necessary to do to, make it a little bit easier for folks to, let concerns be known. Like if they were part of a non-consensual tow, especially, at least providing an avenue, a more clear avenue for going about trying to get those concerns addressed.
Yeah, certainly something worth celebrating there in Arkansas. Again, towing reforms very much needed in many states in Arkansas.
Yeah,
taking a step here.
And worth pointing out with this new law, and it was one of the things that was addressed on the Senate floor before its final vote to send it to the governor, was that what they're doing with this, it's the first step to address concerns that they have had in Arkansas about predatory towing. When the new board is put into place, they will then most likely come up with some recommendations that they will then take to the legislature for additional towing reforms there in the state. So that was one of the things that was pointed out. This is essentially the first step.
To be continued there. Nice to see that they're going to keep an eye on that as well moving forward. Let's shift gears here and run through a few states that are either changing or looking to change the way or how much, I guess, they collect fuel taxes. We're going to start with the one state where the changes are now official and signed into law. Mississippi. What's going on there?
Yeah, we've been following this early this year. Went through pretty quickly. The governor here recently signed into law as part of a we talked about this massive tax overhaul that the governor had been advocating for, and fuel tax increase was a component of that. Previously, they had an 8-cent increase, or I guess technically they still do, until July 1st. Starting July 1st, they're going to start a series of, over the course of 3 years, 3-cent increases. So by the time we get to July 2027, the tax rate for both gas and diesel in Mississippi will climb to 27 cents. And then worth pointing out, beginning in 2029, they're going to have an adjustment component to it, so they will have regular increases for much smaller amounts than the 3 cents that they're going to be having here for the next few years.
So that's in Mississippi, where, again, this is definitely happening now because it was signed into law. We've got a few other states looking at this issue right now and trying to figure out exactly what to do, Michigan being one of them. We've talked about Michigan before and the deficit there they're running with transportation funding. I would imagine that's going to factor into what they're talking about there.
Yeah, looking to secure more funding for transportation using existing revenue that's coming into the state. Michigan's got the 31-cent fuel excise tax. They also have a 6% sales tax that's on fuel. Now, the sales tax, that goes largely for other purposes, not related to transportation. So the thinking is if they replace or swap out that sales tax on fuel and instead increase the excise tax that's required to go to transportation, that they would have more money for transportation purposes. In effect, what that would result in is a 20-cent increase in the excise tax there in Michigan.
We'll keep an eye on that. Let's move to the Pacific Northwest here, Keith. Can we knock out Oregon and Washington here pretty quickly?
Yeah, we'll see what we can do. With Oregon looking into a 20-cent increase in the gas tax over the course of 6 years, essentially an equivalent increase for the weight mile tax would also be implemented. At Washington State, looking to increase the fuel tax rates there by 6 cents. And in addition to doing that, they would also add an inflationary adjustment so that, like we talked about earlier, would allow it to increase regularly, much smaller amounts, but essentially every year.
You did it. You got them in. Missouri, Rhode Island also looking at this issue. If you want to check out the details on that, go check out Keith's story on landline.media. Keith, a pleasure as always, and we'll see you again next week.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine, and our thanks to you for listening to Landline Now. That's our show for today. We appreciate you tuning in and hope to see you again soon. Until then, take care and drive safe.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars. Fishing.
My kids.
Chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.